Jean-Marie Straub's final feature film was 2014's Kommunisten, the first directed without his spouse Danielle Huillet, who had passed away in 2006, since 1968's The Chronicle of Anna Magdalena Bach. Straub and Huillet's cinema is very specific indeed. It has a bizarre commonality with the structural pathos of Warhol and Snow, although infused with the continental classical contemplations which earn the most attention from prestigious festival-oriented academe. I think what the critics found so compelling about this duo's oeuvre was their cinematographic precision, minimalism, how a surface-level lack of directorial technical decisions appears to suggest thousands of decisions, considerations, from a more philosophic stance. One will gauge that the average shot in a Straub Huillet film features players dressed in classical Greco-Roman attire, reciting an ancient Greek play, an Enlightenment-era play about an ancient Greek, a 20th century quasi-socialist or socialist text, or some other mode of existential treatise. The camera is static, the players speak in enunciated statements. It makes you wonder, if you're not careful that is, why it isn't just staged theatre, a play, rather than this feature film experience, but the uniquely filmic qualities of these works are confirming the cinematic necessity of Straub Huillet's work. The dialogue is always a literary extract, whilst the particular subjects of the camera, player or landscape, will always implant the vector of the text into a viewer's mind, more so than prose, removed from character dialogue/narration, or stage directions ever can. When we move to a close-up of a performer after a wide shot featuring three of them, Straub and Huillet employ the most minimal of cinematic techniques, as glued to the formative years of the medium as possible, in order to demonstrate a highly intrinsic aesthetic superiority with the film form. I'm reminded, as I am with Warhol's features or Snow's to an extent, of that inspiring James Benning quote. Benning felt as though film moved along too quickly, rather than letting the new potentials of the medium breathe to learn what it was capable of uniquely. Straub and Huillet gave cinema the prestigious class of dense literature or classicist theatre, composing cinema for a class of pretentious Western European literary Marxism. If Guy Debord was to enjoy any cinema, maybe this was it, or not. He was more of an anarchic populist, somewhat. Situationists and Straub may not necessarily align, really. However, for this feature, Hui had, as I mentioned, passed on, and so Straub sought to do something slightly different here. I'll read out this passage from Wikipedia which outlines how the two would divide their work on a feature, or one of their several short films. Due to his more extroverted nature, Jean-Marie Straub served as the public face of the couple. This has contributed to the widespread assumption that Huillet's role in their filmmaking process was secondary. In reality, the two split their work equally, with Straub responsible for mise-en-scene, Huillet controlling much of the production design and editing process, and the two being equally responsible for the pre-production, texts, and rehearsals. So, for Kommunisten, without the assistance of his beloved Huillet, Straub, to quote this passage from Mubi, once again invents and surprises with his latest film. Kommunisten consists of 6 parts, 5 of which have been taken from his earlier works. Straub does not aim to be self-referential, but instead wants to make different blocks of text, time, and language clash so as to highlight invisible elements of feelings and politics. It is a film about human adventure, from the past century to the one ahead. In this project, all the things that the films of Jean-Marie Straub and Danielle Huillet have been based on for the past 50 years find their most raw and recent form. I think Straub wanted to display a commonality and consistency between the varying subjects of his film works in order to demonstrate a power of film editing, how one can find a unity between contexts of time and place in order to further understand certain cultural manifestations as continuations rather than subversive aberrations, in this case, tying his politics into the daring rock star, often dying ancient Greek rebellious philosophers, pre-Socratic in particular, seemingly, and also to understand himself, Straub, how he directs a film and why he feels as though his work was of some potential philosophic importance. Kommunisten can feel like a very conscious attempt to bring his feature film artistry full circle, a reenactment of several older scenes in a vague effort to compose a dialectic tone poem. One ponders why Straub chose these scenes in particular and what message he was trying to deliver by sewing them together in this structure. Straub Huillet films require a particular mood which you might not have been aware existed until you actually view them, although the first feature, 1965's Not Reconciled, also the only one we've discussed here on AOD before, is a touch more accessible. I mean, if you're familiar with, say, Alain Resnais or some of those guys, I think certainly from the mid-70s on, their work takes on the tone of highly dense, particular structured cycles of old classical or neoclassical poetry, political polemic, or existential rumination. These feelings can arise when reading or trying to read, but mainly just skimming certain older works of translated Greco-Roman literature, poetry, or politics/philosophy, and certain European works of the pre-war or immediate post-war era. The world of theory and critique and intense cultural snobbery, but you rarely encounter this in a feature film because such works are not conducive to the cinema. Unless you were Straub or Huillet, in my opinion, two of the most ingenious practitioners of the form, two of the most original, compelling, and intellectually arresting of all filmmakers in our history. Few filmmakers compose the equivalent of life-changing acid trips in their features without relying on trippy psychedelic visuals. Indeed, psychoactive compounds may help one appreciate these films immediately. You'd become glued to the subtitles and totally floored by every image, rather than thinking about the passing of time. When reading, the temptation to skim is ever present. I suspect more people do than are willing to admit to, and also one can put down the book for a break, read it out aloud. It can feel less slow-paced than watching one of these films, so when watching one of these films, put yourself in a place where you'll be entranced by anything that isn't distractingly obnoxious and enjoy, or better yet, do try it sober, or say California sober if you must. I think if any filmmaker had a lot to say whose decisions suggest some of the most thoroughly considerate contemplation in directorial history, whose works feel like they might penetrate the pretensions of the most ardent high society snobbery of the literary letters academe kind, it is these two, the legendary, audacious, mysterious, cute, original, and intellectually convicted Jean-Marie Straub and Daniel Huillet. The English title of this film, translated, is Communists, this being the gravity, the thread with which the narrative players, these scenes from the prior oeuvre, are tied together. The ultimate theme and conviction of Straub's artistry.